Child abuse. It's a significant and growing problem in the United States today. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, over 500,000 children were victims of abuse in 2022 alone. That translates to a rate of 7.7 victims for every 1,000 children. Unfortunately, LGBTQ+ youth are disproportionately the victims of child abuse. For example, while only 4.5 to 7% of the general youth population is LGBTQ+, they can constitute up to 40% of the overall homeless youth population. That's according to the Trevor Project and Lesley University. Here on Cape Cod, you might not think that child abuse is a problem, but you'd be wrong, says Jacob Stapledon, Community Engagement and Education Manager for Children's Cove, a child advocacy center based in Hyannis. As he tells PFLAG Cape Cod's Rick Koonce in this revealing and chilling interview, child abuse is a problem that often hides in plain sight. Even more distressing is the fact that most cases of child abuse never get reported. Still, says Stapledon, there are things that loving parents, teachers, and caregivers can do to ensure the safety of young people. It begins, he says, by acknowledging the problem, reporting it to authorities, and becoming knowledgeable about community services designed to address the needs of traumatized kids and put child abusers and sexual predators behind bars. Jacob Stapledon, welcome to Profiles in LGBTQ+ Courage. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jake, we are here to discuss a very serious topic, child abuse, and specifically child abuse and its occurrence here on Cape Cod. You are the Community Engagement and Education Manager for Children's Cove, which is a children's advisory center here on the Cape. Tell us a little bit about Children's Cove and your role with it and what Children's Cove does to serve the community.
Yeah, absolutely. So Children's Cove, we're what's known as a child advocacy center. We cover the entire Cape and both islands. We're one of 12 child advocacy centers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. There's more than 950 across the country. And what we do is we provide the coordinated multidisciplinary response to cases involving crimes against children in the region. And more in particular, we focus on cases involving child sexual abuse, severe physical abuse, witness to domestic violence, as well as sexual exploitation and trafficking of children.
You know, I think we tend to want to think that the Cape is a haven, a safe place for all people. Can you talk about the degree to which child abuse is a problem on Cape Cod?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the challenges with that perception is when we just look at raw numbers, right? Because when you get into data, you get into statistics and you look at things, when you compare the numbers of child abuse reporting, of investigation, even the cases at Children's Cove, it doesn't provide the context that we're one of the lower end of communities with the population of children. We actually have the third lowest population of children in Massachusetts. And so even when we're giving those numbers, it can seem small, but we've receive on average between 200 and 250 referrals for cases involving those crimes against children. So these are things that go beyond, child abuse and neglect, which is something that the Department of Children and Families would investigate on their own. This is related to severe abuse and child sexual abuse.
Yeah. How do people get referred to you? How do you interact with local community agencies and offices?
Yeah. So the way in which processes start, and this is when we're talking about a formal investigation, right? That there has been a report that has been made, whether a child has made a disclosure of a sexual abuse, whether a mandated reporter, such as a teacher or a counselor, has received that information and filed a report on their behalf, or they had a reasonable suspicion to believe that something was going on. When those reports take place, if it involves child sexual abuse or sexual exploitation or trafficking, those cases get bumped over to us. We work collaboratively with all departments of law enforcement across the Cape and Islands, the Department of Children and Families, which is the child protection agency for Massachusetts, the Cape and Islands District Attorney's Office, as well as the Department of Public Health through their PD SANE program.
You have told me that 90% of child victims are abused by someone they know. That figure is astounding to me. Who are these predators in the abused child's life?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is just the statistic. Is it's 90% of the time it's somebody they know and trust. Unfortunately, 30 to about 40% of the time on a national statistics level, it's somebody who is immediately within the home. It's somebody who is a family member who is within their home. Another 30 or 40% or so is somebody that if they're not in the home, they're a trusted adult in their lives or a trusted person in their lives. So it's a teacher, a coach, a camp counselor, a member of their faith community. It's somebody who has a role of trust and care, both for that child, but also for their family and the community, which is why it also makes it so incredibly difficult for individuals to disclose. On average, only 1 in 10 child victims will ever disclose that they've experienced sexual abuse, not just while it's happening, but over the entire course of their life as well.
Well, and I know that LGBTQ plus youth are disproportionately represented in the ranks of abused children. Talk about that. Why is the case, and what are the unique challenges that they face?
Yeah, there is a disproportionate amount in which individuals who identify as LGBTQ are abused. You know, according to national reports, it's nearly twice as often that they report that they have experienced sexual contact or sexual abuse that, you know, they did not consent to. When we look at rates of sexual exploitation and trafficking, and in particular survival-based trafficking, there's definitely a disproportionate number there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of LGBTQ youth who are unhoused or homeless in our country, which increases their vulnerability. So we look at those numbers there of what's reported, but we also have to look at what are we seeing locally? And we're seeing a disproportionate amount of those who are coming forward and receiving our services. Over the last 2 fiscal years and reporting, less than 2% of those who came to our care and services self-identified as LGBTQ. And we know that that is not the population in our community, especially when we have communities with much higher populations of that. Those barriers of disclosing, those barriers of seeking support and help is so complex and nuanced.
Well, you've told me, we've talked a little bit about the fact that for an LGBTQ plus teenager, for example, there's the issue in some cases of double disclosure, maybe having to report that they've been abused, but also having to, by doing so, come out to their family, their friends. And so how does one handle that? I mean, when you run into that, and what do you see?
Yeah, it's so hard. And when we look at especially when we're talking about teens or tweens or those that are in those kind of younger years and trying to really self-explore and identify and see who they are and having experiences, we see this as a commonality of where a sexual experience moves beyond consent, that consent wasn't given, that it becomes forceful or aggressive, or it was not something where both participants were willfully and enthusiastically engaged. And in instances where somebody identifies as LGBTQ, or that's where they believe they're identifying, but they haven't had that conversation with family, they haven't had that conversation with friends because maybe those aren't safe spaces. Maybe they're not ready to talk about that. Maybe they're still confused and they're just exploring. That adds an additional layer of, I need help and I'm not ready to talk about this, but this is going to force me to talk about it. And so the internal dialogue that can get in the way of just asking for help can be that barrier.
Well, and this is where I think gaining access to the system for interventions and for support becomes so important. And talk a little bit about the CAC approach and what makes it unique. I know you've said to me that one of the traumas that a lot of abused children have is when they have to tell their story over and over again. So how does the CAC approach work?
And that's the whole premise of how child advocacy centers started is, we looked at the way in which these types of cases were being investigated, and in particular with sexual abuse and sexual assault, is when somebody makes that disclosure. They find that courage, right? That only that 1 in 10 are able to speak up and voice that out. They can find themselves very easily in a process of talking to, let's say they tell a teacher and then a guidance counselor and then a nurse, and then they're being asked to talk to the vice principal who's going to make a report and talk to a child protective worker. And then there's a police officer coming out. That can become so burdensome and so challenging, because not only are they having to tell all these people something tremendously invasive and scary and traumatic, but every time they're telling that story, they're reliving that trauma. The Child Advocacy Center model moves to eliminate that. We provide training and education to those mandated reporters and first responders in the community, whether it's law enforcement, teachers, youth serving organizations, to say, gather the basics, do what we call a minimal facts interview. What happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Who is it with? Who else have you told about this? And leave it there so that when that individual comes to the Child Advocacy Center, they can meet with our forensic interviewers. Now, what we do is we coordinate what's called the multidisciplinary response. We want to gather all of that information for the person who makes that report to us, law enforcement, child protection, the DA's office. We're going to identify, is this individual, are they ready to come in? Are they ready to share their story and talk about this? Are they willing to do that? Sometimes these complicated situations can make it so that somebody's saying, I'm not ready to talk about this, right? Are they able to come in, right? Because we have to look at all elements of life, right? Life doesn't stop because a disclosure has been made. Sometimes people still have sports that they're doing, or maybe they have finals going on this week, or, hey, you know what? No, that's not a good day because I've got to work after school. Are they able to come in on a particular day? And how do we make all of that work, right? We need to, that's the very first step, is we're going to look at how are we engaging with this individual and empowering them to be able to come to us.
When your therapists and counselors meet with abused children, is it common for a child to think that somehow they're responsible for their own abuse, that they brought it on or invited it?
You know, that can be a thought process, but honestly, most often that is an introduced thought, right? Is we fear that for victims of sexual abuse. And sometimes there is this thought of like, oh my God, this is my fault. I should have done this. I should have done that. A lot of the times, though, that's brought forward either by the perpetrator trying to manipulate them, right? And to not talk about it. To gaslight them. To gaslight them, to make them say, well, you're the one who wanted to do A, B, and C, right? For them to not step forward and talk. Other times, it's people who are very well-intentioned and well-meaning to try to tell them, hey, you didn't do anything wrong. This isn't your fault. And internally, we're like, well, yeah, I know this wasn't my fault. Why are you saying that? Did you think it was my fault? And then that allows that seed to be planted. So when we take the approach, right, and we do have that person, they're ready to come in, they're meeting with our forensic interviewer, it's an open-ended conversation. It's a non-leading conversation. It's investigatively based and sound. It's a forensic interview, so it needs to stand up in court because it's a part of a criminal investigation. And we want to understand what happened, and we leave that to that person to tell us why you're here today. You know, tell us what happened.
Are either girls or boys more likely to be abused?
So in the United States, there's a couple of different statistics. The one that is very common is that nationally 1 in 4 girls will be victims of sexual abuse before they turn 18, which from a public health perspective, that's more girls who get impacted by sexual abuse and sexual assault than women who will be diagnosed with breast cancer. The other statistic related to boy-identified individuals is that 1 in 6 boys or 1 in 10. So somewhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 10 boys will be victims of sexual abuse and assault. The challenge is that the rates of disclosure are disproportionate. You know, female identified individuals are far more likely to disclose than male identified individuals, in part because of the stigma associated with it. Because there is one commonality, is that 90% of offenders are men. And when you have individuals who, especially young men, who they may identify as gay or members of the LGBTQ community, or they may not. And we have a stigma against that in our country. And that makes it so much harder for young men to disclose. So the rates of abuse, it's hard to tell for sure because the rates of disclosure are lower. What I can say is that at Children's Cove, about between 70 and 75% of the cases we see are female identified individuals, and the remainder are either young men or LGBTQ specific or trans individuals.
Can you talk about the telltale signs that a child has been abused? What should any concerned parent, caregiver, teacher be mindful of?
Yeah. So that's hard, right? Because a lot of the times and most of the time, people don't disclose. And most of the time, individuals are trying really hard not to disclose, and so they're trying to hide it. The most common, especially for younger children, are going to be behavior changes. You're going to say, man, that Jake, something seems a little off with Jake lately. He doesn't seem like himself. He seems a little withdrawn. He seems kind of pulled back, or he's really around me all the time and constantly trying to get attention. You're noticing behavior changes of individuals that makes you say something seems off. For individuals who are older in their teen years, one of the larger challenges with that is that isolation, that withdrawal, and especially from peers and community. In teenage years, friendships, relationships, all of those are so critical and such an important part. And if individuals are withdrawing or kind of shrinking within themselves, not taking care of themselves, using substances beyond experimentation, self-medicating, those are things that are concerning. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean specifically sexual abuse. It could mean that there's other things that are going on in their lives. It just means, hey, something's happening.
Yeah. I know according to a 2024 report I got from your office, there's been a surge in online child abuse, sexploitation. What's causing that? And can you share with us what's going on in that domain?
Yeah. So, in addition to the services that we provide for those who have been directly experienced sexual abuse or severe physical abuse, beginning almost 10 years ago, we coordinated the regional response in partnership with those other agencies related to what we call sexual exploitation. And there's a few things that falls under that. There's commercial sexual exploitation, which is what can be defined as human trafficking, which is not like the movie Taken or things like that. It's a much more dramatized version of it. But then there's also sexual exploitation and other forms which can take place online. We saw a significant shift to online sexual exploitation as a result of COVID. Our entire world shifted from in-person to online, and that surge of online life meant that individuals who mean to do harm to children also migrated there. And so we've seen that regionally, not just on the Cape and Islands, but in Bristol County and Plymouth County, where online facilitated crimes, so people catfishing and asking for nudes or sexually explicit photos or videos, and then essentially saying to them, if you don't send me more or do A, B, and C, then I'm going to send this to your family. I'm going to send it to your
revenge porn.
Yeah. Which can then for either generate more, and then people find themselves in this trap. Right. Mm-hmm. Or they're having to give money and then they're still in a trap. Or it transfers to, we're going to meet in person, when then they're in person where they're exploited and assaulted as well. So we're seeing a lot of that shift into an online world just because of the nature of how our world is working now.
So to that point, what is your advice to parents who don't want to be overbearing and prevent their kids from getting online, because every kid is online nowadays? What's your advice as to the strategy or the approach that parents should take to really safeguard their children's safety online?
Well, I think it starts right in the beginning, and it starts with having conversations about body safety right at the get-go. When we talk about prevention, we have to look at this as in a holistic approach. When we look at safety, we can think of all the conversations that parents or caregivers may have had with us about crossing the street and holding hands and being careful around fire and being careful around water and being careful around sharps and being careful around firearms. And we never talk about the private parts of our bodies, where we're scared to say the actual words of that. And so we mystify our own biology, which makes it harder to have conversations about consent, about what parts of your body are private and who is allowed to see those, who is allowed to touch those, when are they allowed to, giving children autonomy. And because we're so scared to have those conversations, it makes it almost impossible to carry those conversations over to what is happening in your online world. The other piece of this too is that we're in the experiment phase of living a life online. This didn't exist 30 years ago. And so the parents today never had those conversations either about how are you safe online. So big recommendation. One, have conversations about body safety and consent early and have them often and repeatedly. Transfer that to online. But you also have to be involved with your child's online life as much as you're involved in their in-person life. If you know who their friends are, you know who their teachers are, what they're doing for homework, what sports and activities they're involved in, what apps are they on, what social media are they on, what games are they playing, what's the latest update, what is that character? Tell me about it. If you're not involved, you're not going to understand when something is wrong. So that involvement is critical. And as a parent, you're the one providing it. You have complete autonomy to do what you want to on that. But we also have to remember that children's lives are wrapped up online. It happens with school and with work. You can't just take it away anymore. It's not there. You have to teach children about digital safety and mindfulness and responsibility and have those conversations and build that into the system. Hey, you're getting this new digital device and I'm going to check on it from time to time. I'm going to check your chats and you can establish rules. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit relative to the issues online about online grooming. How do predators do that with a child?
It's varied, just like in person. Most of the time it's because they're going into spaces where children are. And so children are not thinking, wow, this might be a weird 40-year-old guy sitting on the end of 4 different monitors that's sending out a bunch of messages to people, right? I think there's been a lot of media conversation about some platforms where that has been an issue. But these individuals, this is what they do. And they understand systems better than kids do. And so they will pretend that they are either a child or a similarly aged individual, or for teens, they're trying to pose as a person of the opposite gender or somebody who they may be attracted to, or they may be trying to connect with them in some way that maybe they don't feel that in the real world people are going to be able to connect with them, which is also where individuals who identify as LGBTQ, where they're at risk as well, because it can feel isolating. They may not have people in their own lives or in their homes that empathize or sympathize or understand with their struggles, and they'll turn online. And individuals are going to take advantage of that. They're going to gain trust. They're going to build relationship. They're going to try to be the most important person to them, and then slowly introduce or ask for inappropriate communication and conversations. It's not going to be overt. It's not going to be something right away, although sometimes it is. Usually for individuals where there's that kind of grooming, that process, they're trying to build a relationship. They're trying to build a system where that person can't just cut off communication because it's going to feel like they're losing something.
Yeah. We don't talk about this very often, but the whole topic of pedophilia and pedophiles, are there statistics out there relative to that population that we need to know about and keep in mind?
So that's not my area of expertise per se. What I can say is that there's, again, with this whole issue, there's some misconceptions. There's pedophiles, right, or pedophilia, which are those who have an innate attraction to individuals who are prepubescent. So they have not gone through puberty. And then there's hebophiles. So those who have a attraction to individuals who are not yet adults, but they have gone through puberty. And just like any other person, right, within their context, is they have certain elements of attraction. It could be based on gender. It may not. It may just be the age. It may be physical appearance. It may not, right? It could be any number of things. There's not just one profile, right? Because it's just like any other individual. What can be said as a commonality is that to a degree they're aware of it. Sometimes people choose not to act on it. Other times they're very intentional in how they act on it. And when individuals are intentional, you'll see that this is not a once-off where, I made a mistake. Most individuals, if they offend against a child, it is not the first time. It's not the last time. They're serial offenders.
As we record this, the Jeffrey Epstein story is all over the news. And of course, in the past, we've heard so much about what's happened in the Catholic priest community, and it strikes me that one of the challenges for any young person is when they're confronted or approached by a person in a position of power who has authority or who has money. What do parents need to advise their kids of in that regard? Because I think, we know about abuse by Catholic priests in years past, where in some cases a parent was willing to let their child go with someone for a weekend retreat, for example, thought nothing of it. But what's your counsel there about how parents should deal with coaches, clergy, anyone who's in a position to be around kids? You don't want to give that person the third degree, but what does a parent need to keep in mind?
So kind of stepping back into one of those commonality pieces that you had talked about, one of those commonalities that you can find with individuals who mean to offend against children is that they are going for low-hanging fruit. They are not going to typically target a child who's in a two-parent stable home with both parents working, financially secure and stable. They're attending their parent-teacher meetings and going to their sports games, right? They're going to be looking for children who may have a single parent who's working two jobs, who's struggling to make ends meet. They're looking for individuals that maybe there's a rift or distrust between a child and a parent, and they are seeking to exploit that by becoming a person that child is going to trust more than their own parent, or they're going to build trust with that parent to make themselves seem above reproach. And let me help take this burden off of you, right? Yeah, the parents willingly let them go because they've been working 70 hours a week and they don't know what to do on the weekends. And this is something that's just helpful for them. They can come in and be a savior in a sense while they're exploiting that child. And so the defense there is be involved, ask questions, show up. That's really hard. I know that for so many parents that are struggling and to do it. But that's a critical piece, is by showing that you're involved, by asking those questions, by asking difficult questions, right? Anyone who is not intending or meaning to harm a child is going to give those reassurances.
So it's really about, as a parent, being present to your kids. And so if, let's say someone, a teacher, a minister, an observant neighbor, they think someone has been abused, Jake, what should they do? To whom should they report it? And what should they not do?
So first, I think one of the things I want to make sure everybody understands is at Children's Cove, you can give us a call. You can call us. You can email us. We want to answer your questions. You can call us anonymously to talk through a situation you're not sure what to do or how to address it. Give us a call. We'll walk you through it. If we need to build a connection to somebody to make a report happen or something there, we'll do that. So just give us a call. We're happy to help with that. If you're a neighbor, a parent, a family member, a teacher, you're seeing something, you're seeing that behavior change, you're recognizing that something doesn't seem right, speak up. Speak up. I say this often when I'm providing trainings out in the community. I would rather make a report and bring something up and be wrong than not say something and be right. Because if I'm wrong, the message that sends is, I'm here to protect children in my community. I made a mistake. It was not against you. It was my concern for this child, right? I want to make sure that kids are safe, right? That's where we need to err. We need to speak up.
On the side of caution.
On the side of caution. We need to say something that if something doesn't seem right, if it feels wrong, you have a concern, speak up, report it, document it, write it down. Because if you don't, it never existed. And unfortunately, sometimes what we'll see is that there were a lot of people who made note and said amongst themselves, something doesn't seem right. And then after something has happened, say, man, I knew something was wrong. Well, but why didn't you say anything? Because this could have prevented that.
Get involved.
Get involved, right? And even if it couldn't have prevented it, could it have stopped another incident? Could that one time that it happened have been the only time rather than the second or the third or the fourth, right? Get involved, speak up.
You mentioned trainings a couple of minutes ago. Talk about what you do in your capacity to work with schools, maybe faith communities. How are you getting the word out and educating institutions and community service organizations in this area?
Well, I will go anywhere and talk with anyone, anywhere on the Cape and Islands to raise awareness of this issue. But so my role at Children's Cove is, we do have two components, right? We have that direct services, which is going to be responding to those children, to those non-offending family members, supporting our multidisciplinary partners in those investigations. And then there's my program, which is community engagement education, where we do everything external. We'll do radio ads, social media marketing, newsletters. We do prevention education out into the community with youth-serving organizations and early education centers. We provide trainings to teachers, to summer camps about mandated reporting and recognizing those signs of abuse. We provide high-level trainings to our partners, our multidisciplinary partners in law enforcement, prosecution, child protection on how to effectively investigate these cases. We work with faith-based organizations to talk about, well, what about your youth groups? And what about, even Sunday school? How are we ensuring that's safe? I'll go to a congregation on Sundays and talk about this issue because we need to. And for too long, we haven't talked about it. And I'll tell you, some of my greatest conversations I have are sitting down with and having tea with the ladies at the senior center and talking about the generational changes that we have out there. No, if your organization, if you as an individual, if you have children involved in your lives or you have children involved in your work, we can provide you with an educational training or a resource or a conversation at no cost.
Just a couple more questions, Jake, really helpful. And when we talk about youngsters, teenagers, children being traumatized by abuse, if one comes to Children's Cove and the family decides to help that child recover, what is the typical therapeutic pathway for that to happen?
The therapeutic pathway begins from the first phone call by offering that choice, right? We're a child-first organization. Everything that we do is going to be for the child. It's not necessarily because the parent wants it or law enforcement wants it. It's how are we supporting that child? So even when we're going to have that forensic interview, if that child says, you know what, I thought I was ready to talk about this, but I'm not, we're going to stop the interview. We're going to say, okay, what would you like to talk about instead? We want to start with empowerment because when somebody's been disempowered, we want to re-empower them. And if they have that conversation with us and we talk through it, it's called a post meeting. After the interview, we're going to meet with that non-offending parent and caregiver. And that's where our whole MDT comes together. That's the forensic interviewer, law enforcement, prosecution, child protection. We have a pediatric sexual assault nurse examiner who's on our staff. We have a medical suite on site. We have a clinical program manager, and a mental health coordinator. So we're going to be looking at how do we help with healing? So we're going to offer a non-invasive physical wellness exam, right? Which is gender, cultural, everything appropriate, right? We ensure that regardless of who you are, you can receive a non-invasive physical wellness exam to ensure that you're safe. For individuals under 12, we may be able to do the sexual assault nurse exam there if it's been an acute sexual assault. But then we're also going to be looking at what are the resources that are available to them out in the community and what may be needed, whether that's making a referral to a trauma-informed clinician or behavioral health specialist local to where they are, right? Because we're in Barnstable, but if we're serving a family in Truro, they're not coming to Hyannis every 2 weeks for a therapist, right? So we need to find something closer to them. So we're going to take those logistics over and take that off of their back. What if housing is now going to get into the way? What if a member of the family was the perpetrator? What if they were the breadwinner of the family, right? We need to look at how are we going to connect to those resources to ensure that your housing is safe and stable, that rent and utilities are paid for. What about healing activities? We're sitting in the cultural center of Cape Cod right now. We have definitely referred families here as a part of their programs and provided some support for them to engage in the arts because arts are healing. Everybody's recovery, artist therapy, everybody's recovery is unique to what their interests are, to what their passions are, to what their experience was. And so we're going to explore that with them and identify, okay, how can we help support that, but also empower that family, right? And the non-offending family to make that happen so that this is a holistic approach.
Yeah. Well, it's such an important topic, how we deal with child abuse in our communities. Jake, is there anything I haven't asked you about specifically, but that that's top of mind for you as we wrap up here?
Oh, man. I think we've been around since 1997. we're a department of Barnstable County government, which is something that not a lot of people know about. And I think it's something I love to highlight, because when we look at our organizational history, these were representatives of all of the towns on Cape Cod that said, we need to do better for our children. And they created Children's Cove in partnership with the district attorney's office, the county commissioners. I've been at Children's Cove 9 years now. I've worked in all of our communities and had conversations in every school district and every youth serving organization. And if there's one thing that I can say about our community, is that we have a community that cares. We have a community that wants to have a future where children are safe and that they are free from abuse. And we just need to continue having these conversations. I know sometimes taking that next step to ask for support, there can be a lot of voices in our heads that are fear and anxiety, and it's not the experience that you receive at Children's Cove. We're here to listen. We're here to support. It's confidential. There's no cost to anything we do. There's no barriers. Yeah. We just want you to ask for help. If you're a parent, you're a caregiver, you're not sure what's going on. And I've had that happen. I've been out at a table at a community event, and a parent's come up to me to just talk through, and we had them in at Children's Cove a few days later and making a difference, right? Just ask, just reach out. We're here.
Yeah. It all begins with a single phone call or a visit to your website, which is childrenscove.org, right?
That's correct. Yeah. We're on social media. We're on all of the platforms, just about. I'll be honest, I haven't been active on some of them lately, but at Children's Cove, you'll be able to find us.
Well, Jake Stapledon, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Profiles in LGBTQ plus Courage. Such an important topic. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to today's interview. Founded in 1973, PFLAG is the first and largest organization for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and their parents, families, friends, and allies. We have over 400 chapters and more than 200,000 members and supporters nationwide. Our members come from every generation and live in cities, small towns, and rural areas across the United States. PFLAG is committed to creating a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed. For more information about PFLAG, explore the rest of this website or visit PFLAG National at pflag.org.